Tonight, let's return to a chapter forgotten by the waves. One heavy with salt and silence, where the wind once howled through the rigging and the stars watched from high above. But now, there are no sails, no cannons, no gold glinting in the sun, just memory, just breath, just the hush of what came after. There were women, once, fierce and wind-burned, barefoot on planks soaked with brine and blood. Some laughed louder than the men. Some wore blades at their hips. Some stole ships. Some stole silence. And some were captured. What happened to them after the sea was taken? Not all were hanged. Not all were pardoned. Most simply vanished beneath layers of stone, of record, of dust. But tonight, let's find them again, one by one, cell by cell, whisper by whisper. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Dim the lights, let your breath slow. Let the floor fall gently beneath you, as if you were drifting again on the tide. It's late now, the hour where things are remembered. It's the hour where wind speaks softer than words. So come, sink into the stillness, and step carefully. Back into a world where a woman's freedom once smelled like tar, rope, and storm. We begin in the harbor. The holding ship waits. The chains are ready, and she is already aboard. Let the world fade. The harbor was quiet in that hour just before dawn, when even the seagulls folded their wings and the tide rose without protest. Masts swayed gently, like tall shadows nodding to each other in the gray light. Ropes creaked with memory, but no voices answered them. Only the fog moved freely, drifting low across the deck like smoke from a long-doused flame. She stood at the edge of the hold, ankle iron biting softly into skin rubbed raw. The ship beneath her feet didn't rock like hers used to. This one was wider, heavier, meant for waiting, not sailing. Built to hold still in the water, and hold people inside it. Somewhere below, a cough echoed, hollow, slow, and older than it should have sounded. One of the others, perhaps. Or just the sea breathing through old boards. The fog slipped through the cracks in the hull like a thief. Everything here moved as if afraid of being seen. She wore no shoes now. The wood was damp beneath her soles, cold and soft with rot in places where too many had paced the same steps. A bucket of water sat nearby, untouched. A guard stood at the far end, not watching her exactly, just existing near enough to be a reminder. Her eyes moved out past the rail, beyond the heavy ropes that kept this ship tethered, beyond the stack of crates and the gull nesting in the lantern box. She looked where the town might be, just beyond the fog, where streets wound like ropes and windows were shuttered tight. Somewhere in that town, men were waking, stretching, putting on wigs and waiting to be called to courtrooms. Somewhere breakfast fires were being stoked. Somewhere a woman stirred porridge and did not know she had a pirate in her harbor. But the mist covered all that. Here on the ship there were no sounds but creak, rope, breath, and distant waves folding over themselves again and again like weary hands. A bell rang, soft and wet. Not from this ship, but another. Maybe a fishing boat. Maybe a ship coming in from farther out. It didn't matter. The sound rolled across the water and vanished into the fog. Everything did, eventually. She wrapped her arms around her waist, not from cold, but from the weight of stillness. Her coat had been taken, her hat too, hair damp at the edges, heavy with sea salt and rain that hadn't fully dried. Someone moved behind her, slow footfalls on wet boards. She didn't turn. It was the guard, maybe, or just another woman being brought up for air. 1 hour above, that's all they gave. Brief return to light before the cell swallowed them again. The harbor, even quiet, had its own smell. Tar, damp rope, stirred by shifting tides. Smoke from unseen chimneys. It clung to the skin like sweat. She closed her eyes and let it sink in. Not like her ship, not like the sea. Open and endless, where the air tasted of nothing but sky. That was gone now. She did not speak. She hadn't, since they dragged her from the surf and bound her wrists with frayed rope. She hadn't screamed when they named her. Not quite right. She hadn't begged when they pried the ring from her thumb, the only thing she'd ever stolen for beauty. Below the deck, another door groaned. Metal scraped metal. Someone wept into cloth. The sun, if it was rising, had not yet broken the fog. She listened, waited, let her breath slow. There was nothing to be done now, only to be remembered, or not. And for now, to wait. To wait for the dock, the cart, the stone cell. The sea no longer rocked her to sleep. Now, it only watched. And the mist thickened around the holding ship, swallowing it whole again. The salt had not left her hair, not even after 3 days in the dark belly of the holding ship. It clung to each strand like memory, stiff and coarse, leaving little white ridges where curls used to fall. Once, it had been tied with a strip of sailcloth, knotted in a way only sailors understood. Now, it hung heavy against her neck, matted, tangled, and still smelling faintly of storm. The iron at her wrists had bruised her gently, not sharp, not fresh, just an ache that pulsed deeper with every hour. They hadn't tightened it cruelly, they didn't need to. The weight alone was enough to remind her, with every breath, every shift of the shoulders, that her hands no longer belonged to her. Chains don't scream, they whisper every time she moves. Every time she shifts in her sleep or scratches her arm or presses her fingers against her thigh to feel something warm. The whisper of chain is slower than a scream, but it lingers longer. It gets inside the ears. It curls into dreams. There was no mirror in her cell, but she could feel what she looked like. The sea had always painted her in its own image, wild and wide and wind-kissed. Now the sea had gone, and the land had claimed her, and the land was less kind. Her skin was tight with dried salt, her lips cracked at the edges. A crust of blood rested at the base of one fingernail. She remembered where it had come from, a splinter in the cell's wooden bench, sharper than it looked. Somewhere above, boots paced the upper deck. Heavy steps. 2 people, maybe 3. She listened closely, measuring the rhythm, as if the sound might tell her something. But it told her nothing. Only that someone was alive and moving. Her back pressed against the wall, knees bent, ankles sore. They let her out once a day now, just once, and never for long. A pail of water, a crust of bread. The same tin cup passed from hand to hand between the barred doors. It didn't matter who held it last. In the corner, a rag lay bunched and darkened. She didn't touch it, didn't ask, just left it where it lay. Nothing in here was clean. Not the walls, not the straw, not the air, not even her breath, which tasted more and more like iron each time she inhaled. She tilted her head back, eyes closed, and for a moment she imagined the sway of her ship, the way the planks sang beneath her boots, how the wind caught the sails just so and the lookout called the sea by name. It had always sounded like a woman's voice, that call. There had been others taken with her. She hadn't seen them since the first night. Just one glimpse. Hands bound, skirts torn at the hem, eyes wide from the shock of capture. They'd all been sea women, all touched by the same wind. They sat in separate cells, separate shadows, dreaming separate dreams of freedom, or forgetting. She didn't pray. She never had. But in the stillness of that hold, with her wrists aching and her throat dry, she thought of old hymns. Not the words, just the shape of the sound. The way voices used to echo off the ship's hull on Sundays, when someone got bold enough to pretend they believed in forgiveness. Her cell door bore a small mark, carved years ago. A line with a circle above it. It looked like a mast or a stick figure, or maybe just a meaningless scratch left by another woman with time in a bone shard. She stared at it until her eyes blurred. It didn't blink back. Somewhere to the south, a bell rang once. It's not loud. Far off, not for her. But still, she heard it. And for a moment, something inside her lifted. Not quite hope, just the shape of something that used to be hope. She shifted her wrists, let the iron move against her skin, and listened again to the whisper it made. Soft, slow, and final. She was not afraid of death, but she was starting to forget the sea. And that frightened her more than anything. When they came for her, the mist hadn't lifted yet. It clung to the harbor like a second tide, soft and slow, wrapping the mooring posts in ghostly coils. She rose without a word when the cell key turned. The chains had not been removed. They only shifted slightly, like something breathing in its sleep. The guard didn't speak, just nodded toward the hatchway, where a rope ladder hung down like a forgotten rigging. She climbed with practiced balance, though her feet slipped once on the moss-dark rung. Her fingers, though bound, still remembered how to hold. The wood was wet. Her palms left prints where they passed. Above, the air was colder than she expected, not sharp, just chill enough to remind her that the sun had not yet committed to the day. A gull screamed from somewhere beyond the mist, but she couldn't see it. The town waited in silence, just shadows stacked on shadows. She stepped down from the ship and onto the dock. Her bare soles met the planks with a muted sound. Not like boots, not like hooves, just the hush of skin on wood. Round her other figures moved. 2 guards, one scribe with a ledger under his arm, and a boy holding a lantern with both hands, as if it might try to flee. No one met her eyes. The chains tugged slightly as she walked. Not heavy, but enough to tilt her shoulders. She didn't drag them. She wouldn't. She let them move in rhythm with her steps, letting the sound melt into the soft lapping of water beneath the dock. The dock was old, slick with algae in the seams. She had walked worse. Ships sat silent on either side, sails down, masts bare, their ropes tied in neat loops like nooses. She wondered if any of them had chased her once, weeks or months before, when the sea was still hers. But she didn't look too long. The past here had teeth. They passed a stack of barrels, one marked with a red smear, not blood, just paint. But still she glanced down. Beyond that, the dock bent slightly where the wood dipped lower with rot. The guards shifted behind her, muttering to the other, as if they feared she might try to jump. But there was no sea to run to, not anymore. Only more docks, more stones, more record books. At the edge of the pier stood a cart, low, covered in canvas, the kind used for fish or freight. A thin man sat on the bench, reins slack in his lap. He didn't look up, just puffed on a pipe, the smoke curling into the cold morning like a ribbon of breath from a dying mouth. They stopped her beside the cart. One of the guards unlatched a chain from her wrist and fastened it instead to the frame. Not cruel, just efficient. He adjusted the link once, then stepped back. She didn't move. The mist was rising now, just enough to reveal the slope of the town behind her. Narrow lanes, shutters still closed, roofs bowed with old rain. She had never walked this dock as a free woman, but it smelled the same as all harbors. Brine, tar, wood, the faint sweetness of decay. A gull landed on a piling nearby, its eyes small and black. It looked at her, head tilted. Then it flew. The scribe stepped forward, flipped open the ledger, and whispered a name that didn't belong to her. She didn't answer, but didn't correct him. He marked the page anyway, dipped the pen once more in ink, then nodded toward the cart. They helped her in. The canvas smelled of old fish and cold metal. She sat on the floor, back against a crate, knees bent. A chain rattled once, then settled. One of the guards climbed in beside her. The other took the front with the driver. The cart lurched forward, slowly, gently, as if the horse too did not want to be part of this. She listened to the wheels turn over stone, the rhythm of hooves on the dock giving way to packed earth. The harbor slipped behind them, swallowed by mist once again, and ahead, the town waited. Somewhere, a courtroom, a record, a cell. She didn't look back. There was nothing there but water, and water could no longer save her. The courtroom stood at the edge of the square, quiet beneath the weight of morning fog. It wasn't grand, nor particularly cruel in appearance, just a stone structure with narrow windows and a low wooden door, worn smooth where generations of palms had pushed it open. It looked like it had always been there, as if the ground had grown up around it. The cart pulled in without ceremony. No onlookers, no jeering crowd, just the soft turning of wheels over packed mud and the occasional snap of a damp rain. The horse exhaled a cloud of steam as it came to a halt. The guard stepped down first, then reached for her chain, unhooking it from the cart's bolt without speaking. She climbed down slowly, blinking into the gray light. Her eyes burned. The air smelled of wet plaster, ash, and something faintly metallic. No birds, no church bell. Just footsteps, measured practice, approaching from the shadows beneath the stone arch. He was thin, the man with the ledger, wrapped in a brown coat, stiff from old weather, sleeves too long for his wrists. His quill was already in hand, black ink beating at the tip. He moved slowly, though his steps gave the impression of someone who had once been fast. He had spectacles, slightly askew, and lips that rarely moved when he spoke. He didn't look at her, not fully, just nodded once, as if checking her existence against something he'd been told. Then he opened the book. It was large, bound in thick leather. Pages yellowed and uneven at the edges. There were dozens of names written already, some in dark ink, bold and wet-looking. Others faded to near gray, as if the memory of those names had already begun to rot. He asked her name, voice low, eyes on the page. She said nothing. The guard beside her shifted, ready to correct her silence. But she tilted her head, barely, and gave him a name. Not her own, but one she'd used before. A name she wore when docked in ports like this. One that had passed on tongues, whispered in taverns and over dice games. Not the name she was born with, not the one her mother had whispered while braiding her hair beneath lantern light. That name had been buried at sea. The ledger man paused for half a breath, the tip of his quill trembling slightly as he touched it to the paper. Then came the scratch, slow, deliberate. The ink soaked in unevenly. The letters were too elegant for such a name, but still, he wrote. Age, height, skin tone, distinguishing marks. Each question, spoken as if reading from memory. He never looked at her directly, only flicked his eyes toward her hands, her boots, the space beneath her jaw. She answered some, left others quiet. When asked for her port of origin, she looked up not at him, but past him, toward the distant fog rolling down the alley. Her lips parted, then closed. He did not press, only wrote unknown. The wind picked up slightly then, tugging at the corner of the page. He held it down with his palm, pressing it flat until the quill returned to rest. Then he turned the book. A blank space left her, a blank space left for her mark. She stared at it, but long enough to remember other tables, candlelit and swaying gently, with her hand signing different names, different papers, sometimes in blood, sometimes in ink. Always with something to lose, always with something behind her. She raised her bound hands. The quill was offered. She took it. On the yellowed page, she signed her name. Not real, not false, just the one she carried now. It was smaller than she remembered, her fingers stiff, the salt still in her skin. She turned the ledger back without comment. Blew once across the page, closed it. And with that, she was no longer just a woman taken from the sea. She was record. She was ink. She was now on the list. Inside the stone hall, footsteps echoed too clearly, as if the walls themselves hadn't heard a voice in weeks. Every movement felt louder than it was. Guard coughed into a gloved hand. A door creaked shut far down the corridor, and from somewhere above, water dripped at a steady rhythm. Drip, like a slow clock. No one dared wind. She stood in the entry chamber now. Walls of faded gray, thin light bleeding through slits too narrow to be windows, her wrists still bound. Strip of damp cloth tied around one boot where the leather had split. A draft moved down the hallway like breath through a throat. And then, from the bench behind the clerk's desk, a voice. It was dry, practiced, clipped at the ends. It called her name. Almost her name. The vowels curled wrong. The syllables flattened. There was no music in it. Just the dull thud of a man reading what he did not know. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She had been called worse. The clerk raised his head. A man of middle years, powdered hair just beginning to gray beneath the wig. His robe was loose at the collar. A smudge of ink stained his left cuff. His gaze flicked over her face with no interest, just confirmation that she matched the line on the page. He called the name again, louder this time, a little impatient. The wrong name again. One of the guards answered for her. She was brought forward. The floor beneath her feet was polished smooth from centuries of pacing, not from people like her. Perhaps, but from others who had stood where she stood, waiting for someone behind a desk to decide if they would return to a bed or be taken somewhere colder. The clerk cleared his throat, flipped a few pages, scanned rows of writing without truly reading. Then the list of offenses. Not shouted, just read aloud. One by one: theft, mutiny, possession of weapons, sailing under false flag, impersonating a man, impersonating a captain, harboring fugitives, firing upon crown vessels. The list was longer than she remembered. Or maybe they had added some things to make it look heavier. That happened sometimes. She felt her heart beat slow instead of quicken. There was nothing on that list that surprised her, nothing she wouldn't have done again. Still, each word hung in the air like cold laundry on a line, waiting to dry, waiting to be folded away. When he finished, the clerk looked up. His lips parted again, as if to ask something further. But then he thought better of it. He waved one hand in a lazy circle toward the guards. She was taken through another door, narrower this time, with swollen from damp. No one bowed. No one crossed themselves. Just a woman with iron at her wrists, walking deeper into a place where even her name had already been forgotten. The hallway narrowed as they let her in. The light, already thin, seemed to recede with each step, swallowed by the stone walls and the scent of cold metal. The floor dipped in the middle, worn by years of passing feet, some shuffling, some fighting, some never walking back the other way. They paused before a door. Iron, thick. It looked as if it had been made for something much larger than a woman, sealed not just to contain, but to erase. No paint, no markings, just bolts. And time. The guard nearest her reached into a coat pocket and pulled free a ring of keys. They jingled with the slow, mournful sound of routine, not ceremony. He chose one without looking, turned it in the lock, and the mechanism groaned open. Not loud, just heavy, like something old waking from sleep. Inside, the cell was small, but not as small as she'd feared. There was space enough to sit, to turn, to lie curled if the need came. The walls were uneven stone, slick with moisture near the base. Moss crept into the cracks near the floor, green tendrils reaching silently across the cold. A straw pallet lay in the corner, moldy at the edges, pressed flat from the weight of others before her. No blanket. No window. Just a slit in the top of the far wall, no bigger than a child's hand. From it, faint air drifted down, carrying the scent of chimney smoke and mildew. The guard stepped aside. She entered. He didn't speak, just closed the door behind her and locked it with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. One turn, then two, then silence. She stood in the middle of the cell, unmoving. Her breath came softer now, slower. Not from peace, but from the understanding that movement no longer mattered. She could rush, cry out, throw her shoulder against the stone. Nothing would change. So she stayed still, let her wrists fall to her sides. The iron cuffs scraped her skin with every slight motion, but she didn't flinch. Pain had become familiar now. A companion that asked for nothing but presence. Her eyes drifted to the corners of the room. One held a spiderweb so fine, it shimmered when the light caught it. Another corner bore a pale stain she didn't look at too long. Carved into the wall at thigh height were scratches. Tiny ones. Not words. Not symbols. Just marks. Countless and deliberate. She stepped toward them. Ran her fingers across the stone. Each groove was shallow, but deep enough to be remembered. Someone had lived here. Someone had waited. Perhaps they'd counted days, or heartbeats, or simply minutes until they no longer had to count. She lowered herself to the floor, legs folded beneath her, back against the wall that bled moisture. Her clothes were still damp from sea mist and holding cell sweat, but the chill of the stone was different. It sank deeper. It touched something closer to the bone. She leaned her head back, closed her eyes, listened. A rat scratched in the ceiling. Far off, a door slammed. Even farther, someone hummed. Not a song she knew, just a thread of sound. Thin, rising and falling like tidewater breath, she let it fill the room, not as comfort, but as company. The first iron door had closed behind her, and there would be more. Sleep came in pieces, not whole, not restful, just slow drops of unconsciousness that slid in between heartbeats. Between the sound of dripping water and the ache in her wrists, she did not lie flat, only curled, knees tucked, one shoulder to the wall. The straw beneath her held the dampness of someone long since gone. It smelled of old clothes and breath and something sweet, like rot clinging to wood that once floated. And in that haze between waking and dream, the ship returned. Not the one that held her now, the other one. The real one. The deck stretched long before her, washed in moonlight, its planks dry and gray, worn soft by bare feet and wind. The sails above her whispered with the voice of wind she used to know. Not violent, not tame, just present, just there. The ropes swung slowly on the rigging, trailing in arcs like hands moving through water. There was no crew, no shouts, no laughter, only her, standing barefoot. The sea dark around them, the stars sharp and endless above. She walked the length of the deck in silence. Her hands brushed the rail, fingertips dragging along the grain of the wood. Her palms remembered every nail, every split, every knot. She had tied ropes here, sung here, bled here, buried a tooth beneath the third board from the stern, long ago, on a dare she couldn't remember. The ship swayed gently beneath her, but there was no wind to move it, no waves to lift it. Only stillness. The kind of stillness that lives in memory, not in the sea. She moved to the helm. The wheel turned once beneath her hands, though she had not pushed it. It moved like it wanted her back, like it remembered. Somewhere in the hold, the lantern swayed. Sound reached her ears, faint, distant. The creak of canvas. The cry of gulls, but not real. Not anymore. Just echoes. She turned to face the sea, but there was none. Just blackness, flat and endless. And in the black, a faint line. A shore, perhaps. Or just the edge of a dream. She did not move toward it. She only stood. Arms wrapped around herself. Hair lifting slightly in a breeze that did not exist. And behind her on the ship, the creak returned. Not of wood, not of sail, but of something heavier, something slower. A cell door, shifting open. She woke before it finished, eyes wide in the dark. The cell had not changed. Stone, straw, iron. The humming had stopped. Even the rat was silent now, but her heart still beat in rhythm with the creak of the ship she'd left behind. She touched her cheek. Salt, or maybe just sweat. Her palms smelled of rope and rain, though she had not touched either in days. She lay back again, spine to the cold wall, and let her breath steady. The dream would return. They always did. Never stayed. But they always came back, just like the tide, the sound of sails in a wind that no longer came. The cell was still asleep when the guards came again. No torchlight. Just the pale hush of early gray leaking down the corridor like spilled milk. The door opened with the same old weight, and the cold rushed in first, brushing her ankles like a tide she hadn't asked for. She was already sitting up. She had not truly slept. Not the way she used two-faced to sky, heart in her throat, wind in her teeth. Sleep here was something else. Stillness wrapped around the body, not within it. It waited outside her ribs, watching her, never quite letting go. It didn't chain her this time, just motioned with a hand. She stood. Her joints cracked quietly. She'd stopped wincing. Pain had become as normal as her own breath. She walked barefoot through the corridor, stone cool beneath each step. The halls were quiet, only the drip of water in far-off places, and the whisper of one guard murmuring to the other. She knew the way now. 2 right turns, 1 crooked stair. And the heavy oak door that opened into the upper room where stone gave way to wood, and wood gave way to power. The magistrate's chamber. It was not as grand as the title suggested. The floor was warped from years of wet boots. The rug beneath the desk had rotted at the corners, curling like dried leaves. But the window was clean, large, open, no bars. It faced the eastern sky, and in the dark blue before sunrise, she could just make out the ridge of rooftops far below. Chimneys smoking, a line of clothes hanging still, untouched by wind. The sea beyond them, all silent, flat, waiting. The magistrate had not yet arrived. She was made to wait, alone, not in the cell, but not free either. Just standing in the middle of the room like a forgotten item as the sky lightened, moment by moment. She moved closer to the window, not close enough to tempt the guards, but enough to feel the air through the glassless frame. It was cold, bracing, brined. She closed her eyes, tasted the salt, was different from ship salt. It was town salt mixed with smoke and stone and chimney dust, but it was salt nonetheless. And for a moment, that was enough. A quill scratched paper behind her. A clerk, she assumed. Another one. They all blurred together. He muttered her name wrong again. Scribbled something. Cleared his throat like he'd swallowed dust. And then the door opened. The magistrate entered, robes soft with age, wig slightly askew. He smelled of ink and starch.
8.
He didn't look at her, not at first. Crossed the room slowly, sat down at the desk, and adjusted the position of his candle, though it wasn't lit. Then he turned, eyes finding her at last, as if only now remembering she had a face. She said nothing. Like that, some men did. He asked if she understood the charges. She did not answer. He didn't wait for one. He looked over the papers in front of him with a kind of distant boredom, as if reviewing the weather. Then, softly, almost as if it didn't matter, he asked if she had anything to say in her own defense. Her eyes drifted back to the window. The sky was turning pale now, streaked with soft gold at the horizon. She could almost hear gulls, could almost see the curve of the tide. She didn't answer the magistrate, not because she refused, but because there was nothing left to explain. Nothing she hadn't already lived. The clerk dipped his pen again. The magistrate sighed. And beyond the window, the morning came slow and colorless, as if the world had decided to wake without her. They took her back the long way. Through a corridor she hadn't walked before, narrower, sloped slightly downward, the air colder than the others. A lantern hung from a crooked iron hook near the ceiling, its glass clouded with soot, swung just enough to make the shadows shift, crawling up the wall like thin fingers. Her breath felt louder here, not from fear, but from memory. Somewhere deep in the stillness of that corridor she heard it, not with her ears, but inside her chest. The sound of gulls. It wasn't sharp, the way they sometimes whirl out, laughing, frantic above a fresh catch. No. This was the soft cry, the early one. The sound gulls made when the sky was still pale and the water hadn't yet risen. A low call stretched long over the tide, almost mournful, almost song. She hadn't realized she'd missed it, not until it came back. It was strange what the mind clung to. Not the battles, not the treasure, not the maps, not the thrill, but a bird, a cry. A moment on the edge of waking, when she used to lie on the deck with her hat pulled low and the sun still just a promise on the water, she swallowed. Her throat ached from dryness, not from thirst exactly, but from the absence of wind. The wind had always cooled her tongue. Here the air sat still, stale, warm in the wrong way. The guard ahead of her didn't speak, neither did the one behind. They moved like men used to silence, like men whose voices had learned to stay tucked inside their mouths unless called. As they turned one last corner, she saw the door. Her cell, same one. Straw flattened by her weight. Walls still weeping. The iron key turned again. The sound echoed through her like a dropped stone into deep water. She stepped inside without protest. The door closed behind her, more gently than she expected. No chains this time, just the sound of the lock, then the steps, and the silence. She stood in the middle of the room for a long moment. The straw smelled the same, but her shoulders didn't. They carried something heavier now, something that smelled of paper and smoke, and seabirds crying over things they didn't understand. She sat, slowly, back to stone, palms to knees. Her hands trembled once, just once, and then they stilled. She tilted her head back, closed her eyes. And again, from nowhere, from memory alone, the sound returned, the gull, calling over the water, calling from above the mast, calling through mist and hunger and the slow beat of a tide that never stopped. She let it stay. Let it fill the cell just for a moment, because in the morning there would be no birds, only paper, only ropes, only names that were never hers. Night settled without ceremony. The walls grew darker, not from the absence of light, but from the weight of it. The kind of dark that thickened rather than receded. Even the air seemed quieter, muffled under layers of damp and time. From her place on the straw, she could just make out the breath of the cell beside hers. Shallow, unsteady. It caught now and then, as if the woman there was dreaming, remembering something that didn't want to be remembered. A cough followed dry, small, quickly swallowed. No voice came with it. Were other cells. 7 in this row, by her count, and in them, women. She hadn't seen their faces. Only heard the shift of cloth, the scrape of bone against stone, the occasional whisper that might have been prayer or curse. Some didn't speak at all. Some hummed. Only for a moment, then stopped, as if embarrassed. One laughed, not often and not happily. Just once, the first night. A low sound, strange in the stillness. It had echoed across the row like a question no one answered, and there was one who snarled. Not every hour, but often enough, voice like splintered wood. Sharp and feral, she'd cursed the guards, cursed the court, cursed the sea. Once, she'd cursed a name softly, so that no one knew if it belonged to a man, or a ship, or a child she'd left behind. She wondered if the snarler had been a captain. She wondered if any of them had. They didn't share their stories, not in this place. Words were worth more than gold when spoken in the dark. They could break things open, let something in or out. So the women stayed quiet, some out of pride, some out of habit, some because no one had listened in years. A rat scurried past the stone lip of her door. She didn't move. Neither did the breath in the next cell. The rat continued, tail dragging like a long thread across the moss. She pressed her fingers into her palms, not tightly, just enough to feel her own warmth. It reminded her that she was still here, still breathing, not vanished, not yet. A voice came then, soft not to her, just released into the air. A woman, 2 cells down, whispering words that had no beginning or end. She spoke them like rope looped and knotted, names not hers. Others, each name drawn slow. Each one carried like a stone, and then silence again. She didn't speak back, didn't offer her own. Instead, she leaned her head against the wall. The moisture there chilled her cheek. But the sound of that voice, those names braided with sorrow, held her, long enough for sleep to come. Not fully, but enough. Enough to carry her, just for a while, into the dark, where the other women in the row did not wait for rescue, only the dawn. In the dim hush of mid-morning, when the guards had gone and the corridor lay still, she found the piece of cloth again, the one she'd torn from her hem on the second night, frayed and soft, stiff now with dust. She unfolded it carefully, the edges curled inward like petals after too many rains. There was no ink, no charcoal, just the memory of how to write. Her fingers traced words into the cloth, not to be read, only to be known. It was a letter, but not for anyone here, not for the clerk, not for the court, not for the ship's log where they had written her name wrong for the 3rd time. This was for a face she could barely remember, the woman who'd taught her to braid rope with one hand, who'd carved a compass into the bottom of her boot so she'd never lose the direction of home, if there ever had been a home. She didn't sign the letter. She didn't write about what was happening now. No mention of cells, of iron, of silence that sank deeper with each breath. She wrote instead of gulls, of the smell of oranges at the last port, of a song she'd hummed once under her breath. When lightning struck the mainmast and no one moved, because they were listening to her more than the storm. She wrote about rope burns healing in strange shapes, like maps, and the boy with 2 long sleeves who carved her initials into a barrel before the raid. She didn't know why she remembered that. She had forgotten his name, but not the way he'd looked at her when the sails caught wind, as if she were part of the ship, as if she were wind herself. The cloth wrinkled beneath her palm. She folded it again. Smaller this time, pressed it between 2 loose stones at the base of the wall. No one would find it, but it didn't matter. The sending of it had never been the point. Some letters only needed to be written, even if they never left the room, even if they stayed buried under moss and dust and breath. They lived, softly, like the sound of water in the night, brushing against the hull of a ship that would never sail again. They gave it to her the night before, folded awkwardly, creased as if it had been forgotten at the bottom of a trunk for years. It held no color, dull brown-gray, once white perhaps, the way candlelight yellows lace when no one is looking. She held it up slowly in the cell, letting the fabric unfold in the stale air. It smelled of damp linen, salt left too long in cotton, of time. There were stains, small ones, a thumbprint near the collar, shadow at the hem. She didn't ask where it had come from, or who had worn it last. That was not the kind of question anyone answered in here. It was a woman's dress, but not a pirate's. Not meant for storms, or sails, or the rush of wet wind in the rigging. This was made for standing still, for being looked at. For the way men imagined silence should dress. She didn't put it on right away. She hung it from the corner of the cell door, letting the sleeve catch a draft. Moved like a body sometimes, swaying faintly in the night air. Watching her, waiting. The guards hadn't said when they'd return. Only that she was to be ready. There was no mirror. But she could feel how it would sit on her. How it would press across the shoulders too tight in the chest, as if trying to hide the life she had once carried there. She hadn't worn anything like it in years. Not since she'd first boarded the ship in borrowed trousers and a coat far too large. Hair pinned beneath a cap. Mouth sealed shut. No one had questioned her then. Not until she laughed too easily, too freely, and the crew had stared, not with anger, curiosity. That had been the first and last time she'd tried to pretend. After that, she'd simply been one of them, one of her. And now, the dress sagged at the waist where a corset should have gone. There would be no corset. Just the weight of cloth pretending to be grace. She touched the sleeve with the back of her knuckle. It was cold, still damp from the corridor, still folded in the shape of someone else's shame. She sat again on the straw pallet, watching it, as if waiting for it to speak. It said nothing, but it looked. In the quiet that followed, she thought of all the dresses she'd never owned, silk in port windows, red velvet passed between women in tavern corners, aprons with pockets deep enough to hide knives or letters or bits of stolen fruit. She had once worn a man's coat and danced barefoot on the deck, while the storm passed overhead, lightning slicing the sky open like a curtain. She had kissed someone that night. She couldn't remember their face, only the taste of rum and rain on their lips, and how the crew had roared as if the ship itself had blessed the moment. She closed her eyes now, let the memory fold around her like warmth, then opened them again to the cell, the stone, the waiting cloth. It hadn't moved, but she had, and in the morning she would wear it. The sky was pale with early light when they brought her out. No wind, no sound but boots over wet stone. She didn't look at the guards, didn't need to. She could feel their presence the way one feels the swell of the tide beneath the deck. Heavy, inevitable there, whether you look or not. The trial dress clung to her still damp skin, the weight of it unfamiliar. It itched at the shoulders, sagged at the elbows, pulled slightly at the knees where the cloth had shrunk unevenly. The linen held the chill of the corridor like it wanted to keep it close. They didn't shackle her hands this time. Not for the courtroom. It was, after all, a performance. A woman, quiet and accused, standing in her borrowed skin before rows of men who had already decided how the story would end. The door opened, and the hush fell like snow. Not sudden, just slow, layer by layer. People were already seated. Not many. Half a dozen onlookers, maybe more, behind the partition. Faces blurred by poor lighting, half lit by the pale stretch of day filtering through high, narrow windows. The kind of light that showed dust in the air. The kind that made skin look older. The jury sat to the right. Mostly men with tired shoulders, their eyes dull with sleep or routine. A few leaned forward when she entered. Not curiosity, just the way one watches a storm form on a far horizon. She stepped where they told her. The floor was wooden, old. One plank creaked softly beneath her right heel and stayed creaked, as if even the building held its breath. The magistrate was already seated, different than before, or perhaps the same one, stripped of his robe. He looked down at his papers as if they'd been waiting for him to remember their meaning. He didn't look at her, not yet. The clerk cleared his throat. Read her name? Wrong again. This time she didn't flinch, didn't offer correction. There were no names in this place. Not truly. Blank charges. And wait, in the slow turning of ink into silence, the words began, a voice flat and careful, listing offenses in the order they'd been written: theft, defiance, impersonation, attack upon a naval vessel, Possession of contraband. Content to disrupt the crown's peace. Intent. The word hung. Not proven. Not certain. Just intent. She looked forward. Not up. Not down. Just ahead, toward the low rail of the witness stand and the empty benches beyond. She focused on a knot in the wood. Small. Circular. The kind that forms when a tree tries to heal around a wound. She listened, but not for meaning. The courtroom became a tunnel, long and dim, a place where sound passed without landing. Voices kept speaking, soft, measured, practiced. A few times they asked her to confirm. She did not nod. She did not speak. The silence in its way was more powerful than truth. Or perhaps it was the only truth she had left. Silence earned by wave and wake and sail. Silence that had outlived ropes and cannon fire and broken maps. When the list was done, the courtroom paused. Not in respect, but in habit, someone coughed. A chair creaked, and the magistrate, at last, looked up. Their eyes met, just for a breath, and she wondered if he had ever seen the sea, if he had ever stood at the edge of it, salt in his lungs, and let it unmake him. But his gaze slid past, back to his papers, back to the room, and the hush held steady, soft as mist. Final as tide. The moment passed like all moments do in courtrooms, without ceremony, without care. Just the scrape of a chair leg, the shuffle of papers, the dry clearing of a throat. The magistrate did not look up again. The jury leaned slightly forward, but no further. The room, for all its weight, felt like something drifting just above water, not yet sinking, not yet safe. The prosecutor was a thin man, with a cravat too tight and fingers stained faintly with ink. He didn't rise right away. He finished writing something first, as though she might disappear if he waited too long. When he stood, it was slowly, deliberately, not out of respect, but out of control. Every motion meant to press, not to. Reach he spoke softly, not with passion, but with precision, as if his voice had been carved from marble and left to dull over years of use. He asked her a question, not a cruel one, not yet, just the kind that sounds reasonable to everyone in the room. Why? Did you take the ship? Not if. Why? The question hovered in the air between them, light, dangerous, simple. She stood in the dock, dressed too tight at the collar, her hands pale against the fabric. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She only breathed slowly. Like the tide rolling in under moonlight, she could have answered. She could have spoken of hunger, of broken promises, of men who lied and seas that didn't. She could have spoken of storms, of choices that weren't choices, of salt and freedom, and the long, slow breath of the ocean calling her by name. She could have told them that the ship had called to her, that no man ever truly owned a vessel once a woman set foot on her deck and felt her bones shift to match the sway. She could have said 100 things, but she said nothing. The silence, once again, stretched its arms through the courtroom. Loud, not dramatic, just steady. A soft refusal, heavier than any confession. The prosecutor tilted his head, slightly. His pen tapped twice against the edge of his notes. The magistrate did not intervene. No one moved. Behind her, she could feel the presence of watchers. Faces turned toward her with quiet expectation, some curious, some indifferent, perhaps one or two remembering the sea, the smell of hemp and storm and driftwood. But none of them mattered. Not here, not now, not to her. She looked not at the prosecutor, nor the magistrate, nor the clerk. Her gaze drifted instead to the window, thin, high, dusty at the edges. But beyond it, a slice of gray sky, a bird passed, wings outstretched. Not a gull, but close. She watched it until it vanished, and when she lowered her eyes again, the question was still there, floating, waiting, but she did not answer. And it sank like all things. Left too long at sea, the benches creaked more than the men sitting on them. 7 in total. One woman among them, her bonnet slightly askew, the strings damp from rain. None looked directly at the accused anymore. Their eyes drifted to ceiling beams, 2 candle wax drips, to the dull brown of their own hands. One man, third from the left, had his chin tucked into his chest, breathing softly, not quite asleep, but close enough. The one beside him rubbed his temples slowly, rhythmically, as if trying to recall something he'd forgotten long ago. Only the clerk still moved with purpose, his quill scratching now and then. In the quiet, the ink smelled faintly of vinegar, soaked into the parchment in uneven strokes, and making the letters look as tired as those listening. No one had spoken in minutes. The prosecutor had stepped back, arms folded, face unreadable. The magistrate had gone still behind his desk, one finger tapping lightly at the edge of a law book he would never open. And she, the woman in the trial dress, remained where they'd placed her, standing, unshaken. The dress hung a little, heavier now, sweat and breath warming the fabric until it clung to her in the hollow places at the spine. Beneath the ribs, along the backs of her knees, her wrists, though no longer bound, still carried the memory of iron. Her fingers twitched occasionally, as if remembering rope. The jury had not heard her. Speak they wouldn't. They weren't waiting for words. They were waiting for the moment to pass, for someone to nod, for the magistrate to sigh, for their duty to be complete. The woman with the crooked bonnet shifted, casting a glance toward the magistrate. Her eyes lingered on the papers in front of him. The pale seal pressed against the top sheet. It was already signed. She knew it. So did the rest of them. This was not a trial. It was a tide, and they had all agreed to be carried by it. Outside, a bell chimed not from the court, but from the harbor, low and distant. It startled one of the jurors. He blinked, sat up straighter, looked around as if caught somewhere between dream and daylight. She heard it too. The bell. 3 short tolls. Not a warning, not a call to prayer, just a ship marking time. A ship she would never see. The silence in the courtroom returned. She let it wrap itself around her shoulders like the heavy coat she used to wear on cold nights at sea, the one lined with wool, with the single button missing just above the hip. She missed that coat more than she missed. Most people, the magistrate finally looked up. His hand hovered above the parchment, not for decision, but for performance. And the jury, mostly asleep, watched with eyes half-lidded, not out of disinterest, but because the ending had already been written. All that remained was to read it. He didn't speak again. The question had come and gone, soft, direct, unanswered. No demand, no repetition. Just a quiet offer tossed across the courtroom like a bone into still water. She had left it untouched, and now the silence between them held a shape of its own. But before the magistrate reached for the seal, before the jury shifted again in their fading chairs, the prosecutor looked at her just once. It was not a cruel look, not mocking, not righteous. Just a long, careful study, the kind men give 2 ships on the horizon, too far to see clearly. Too close to ignore. His eyes weren't sharp. They were tired, lined at the edges, washed of any color she could name. The kind of eyes that had seen too many faces in rooms like this. The kind that used to burn and now only blink. Still, there was something in them. Not mercy, not regret, but recognition. As if, a single breath, he remembered her before the courtroom. Not her name. No one here used names. But something older than that. A smell, maybe, of tar, of rum, of blood on deck and sunlight through torn sails. He looked at her the way sailors sometimes glance back at the sea after swearing they'll never return, as if to say, I remember the storm too. And she, for the first time that morning, looked back. Not with defiance, not with sorrow, just a long, steady stillness, the kind a captain gives when the horizon holds no ships and the sky no stars. But the wheel must still be held. Their eyes met. Brief. Barely a moment, but it hung there, weightless and real, like a breath caught in the space. Between wave and wind, he turned first. Back to his desk. Back to ink and paper and forgetting. She didn't follow his gaze. She didn't need to. The look was not a promise. It was not an apology. It was only this. You were real. And now you're here. That was enough. She straightened her spine, let the courtroom fade around her, let the eyes drift, let the magistrate begin to speak again, soft, rehearsed, inevitable. The rope would come, the record would close, but for one sliver of morning, it's too small to mark. Someone had seen her, not the pirate, not the prisoner, just her. And in that look, there was no chain. They read them aloud near the end. The names not just one, but many, each spoken as if it could stitch the room together, as if saying them made them real. They started with the one the ledger held, the name they'd scribbled in the holding ship, the one with her height listed. Wrong, her age guessed too old, a name she'd offered without care, to keep the silence moving. Then came another and another, the names from the posters nailed to tavern walls, from port records, from whispers in back rooms where gold was. Past and flags changed hands, names with slashes through them, names with slanted handwriting, names she hadn't heard in years. Some she had chosen, others had been chosen for her. The Black Widow, Mary of the Coast, the Shoal Ghost, El Farron, sometimes written as Captain Farron, though she'd never said it aloud herself. Bragg. Mary, the Salt Woman. Each name hung briefly in the courtroom's dusty air, echoing against stone, drifting past the jury who barely stirred. The clerk read them slowly, like lighting a series of small, burning candles no one would watch to thee. She didn't correct any of them, didn't smile, didn't wince. They were names born of rumor and need, names used when real ones would not do, names made sharp by men who feared her or loved her, or didn't know the difference. But none of them were hers, not the one from her mother, spoken once in a cradle and never again. Not the name she carried at sea, whispered only into wind. Not the one carved into the wood of her knife, to warn now to read. Not the name that used to make her turn when shouted across a deck, full of rain. They hadn't found those, and even if they had, they wouldn't have known what to do with them. The last name was read with hesitation. No source, no origin. Just a line scribbled on the edge of a document, possible alias, Lydia. The clerk let it hang in the air, questioning the name itself, as if hoping she might twitch at it. She'd known Lydia. She'd known Lydia once. Years ago, a girl who climbed rigging faster than any boy, who could steal rum without moving her feet, who'd once dared her to leap from the stern of a ship into dark water at night, and laughed so hard she nearly forgot to climb back out. That Lydia had died before the first frost of winter, lungs, drowned from within. She wasn't sure why the name struck her now, only that it was the last. The clerk closed the book. The courtroom breathed. The magistrate's eyes flicked downward, then up. Nothing more was said. The names had been recorded, and yet none had touched her. She stood, nameless still, and in that silence, for the first time in days, she almost smiled. They took her down a different corridor after the reading, not the way they'd come, not toward the cells she knew, the hallway. Here was warmer somehow, not from fire, but from use, worn by passage, dusted with candle soot. There was no window, just a long smear of faint light falling through the cracks in the wood above. Her steps were soft. The guard behind. Speak. Neither did the one in front. They walked with the slow weight of men who had done this before, too many times, enough to forget names, but not the sound of the floor beneath their boots. And then, halfway down the corridor, a girl, small, maybe 12. No more. She knelt near the wall, a worn broom in her hands, sweeping ash into a corner where the stone dipped inward like a shallow bowl. Her dress was patched, sleeves too short for her arms. Bare feet, hair tucked into a kerchief the color of river clay. She didn't look up right away, only swept, each stroke deliberate, steady. The rhythm of someone used to silence, someone who knew how to listen without turning her head. The woman in the trial. Dress paused without meaning to. The girl glanced up, only for a second. Brown eyes, sharp, not frightened, just knowing, the kind of look that passes between those who have already seen the worst and chosen somehow to keep breathing. The girl's gaze held. It's hers. Not long, but long enough. Long enough for the hallway to still. The broom froze mid-dash stroke. No. Words, no whisper. Just the weight of understanding between them. Ancient and quiet and impossible to write down. Then the girl looked away. Back to the ashes, the sweep resumed. A soft, slow brushing that barely made a sound. The guard behind her cleared his throat. Barely audible. She turned back toward the hall. The corridor bent left, the girl disappeared from view, but the silence she left behind stayed, and as they walked, the woman let her fingers brush the wall beside her. Just once. The stone was warm. She didn't know why, but it was, and something about that warmth faint, forgotten, held inside it the ghost of the sea. And the soft sound of a broom moving ash across stone, it always came near dusk. Not in the light of morning, when the body ached too loudly, nor in the thick black stillness of night, when the mind curled in on itself, but in that in-between hour, when the sky outside the slit in the wall turned the color of bruised fruit, and the cell took on a softness it did not deserve. That was when the dream began to stir. Escape, not spoken, not shouted, just imagined, quietly, deep in the place where breath goes when it no longer hopes for rescue. She would lie on the pallet then, not asleep, not fully waking, hands folded across her chest. Dress wrinkled and dry now, but still holding the scent of mildew and iron, the corners of the room blurred by shadow, and in her mind a door, not the real one. Not iron and lock and rust, a wooden door, cracked half open. Beyond it, a night washed in fog, soft with silence. The dock stretched ahead, slick with sea-wind ropes coiled like sleeping serpents. No guards, no shouts, no chains, just the creak of wood beneath her feet, and beyond it the water. She never imagined the boat clearly. Not its shape, not its size. Only the sound. The hush of oars dipping. The rhythm of escape. In the dream, she never looked back. Never ran. She walked slow and sure, as if the world had simply forgotten to hold her. She imagined the dress clinging to her ankles as she stepped into the surf, the salt cutting through cloth like a blade through silk. She imagined her hands reaching for the sides of the boat bare. No cuffs, no ache. Sometimes in the dream, someone waited. Not a rescuer, not a lover, just someone. A shadow with calloused hands and an oar already dipped, nodding once, saying nothing. Other nights she rowed herself, the water giving way beneath her. Dark and smooth as oil, she always rowed toward the same thing, a ship on the horizon. Sails drawn but not full. Waiting, she never reached it. The dream always ended before that. A clatter of keys, a rat in the stone, a cough in the next cell. But in that dusky stretch between hunger and sleep, the dream returned, not in full, just enough. A taste, a pull, like tide on an anchored hull. Reminding it what it once was, she opened her eyes now, slow. Careful, the sky outside the wall slit had turned from bruised plum to a kind of silver evening. The air felt different, cooler, not from weather, from possibility. The dream would not come, again tonight, but the shape of it stayed. Pressed beneath her, RIBSA map, made of longing dot, drawn not in ink, but in the way her hands curled inward. Already remembering how to hold the sea, the sound came before the sight. A low thrum, distant but steady. Not the cry of birds, not boots, not bells. This was the slow roll of a ship drawing past the harbor, just beyond view, where the world still moved without her. She sat up slowly. Her back ached from the cold of the wall, from sleeping to still for too long. Her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes turned toward the slit near the ceiling, a thin crack of sky, no wider than a candle, flame. She couldn't see the ship, but she knew. She could feel it, the way a sailor feels the shift of wind through the deck, before the sails catch. The way water pulls at the hull before it turns. The room changed with it, ever so slightly, the faint smell of pitch, the hush of oars pulled in, the wooden groan of a vessel. Moving slowly under weight, not a merchant ship, not this late. This was something else. She listened harder, held her breath, let her whole body become an ear pressed to the world she no longer touched. It passed slow, not close, just within memory. In her mind, she saw it clearly, a low black hole. 3 sails, canvas weathered and soft, no flag raised. A ghost ship in all but name, gliding just outside the law's reach. She saw the ropes, the lines left coiled at the bow, the empty chair near the wheel. She imagined the crew, faceless, quiet, watching the windows of the prison as they passed. Not waving, not calling, not needing to. It was enough that they moved, that they were free. Her hands curled around her knees tighter. Her fingers remembered rope, remembered pulling against tide, remembered blister and blood and laughter at the edge of storm. She had sailed without. Maps before had taken a ship with nothing more than a wind and the sound of waves promising elsewhere. And yet now, here, she couldn't even see the water, just that strip of gray sky, just that imagined mast. The ship was gone before she even realized it. The sound faded gently, without echo. Breath released in sleep. Somewhere below, a door slammed. Woman coughed once, deep in her cell, and was quiet again. The silence pressed in close, but not like before. Now it carried something with it, not hope. Not yet. Just the reminder that the sea was still moving, that ships still passed, and that not all names were forgotten. Some sailed on. She hadn't spoken to any of them until now. There were voices. Yes, low murmurs in the dark, rustling from one cell to the next, the occasional curse or humming thread of song, but not to her, not for her. The women in this place knew better than to form attachments. There were no stories here, just shadows with breath. But tonight, just after the change of the guard, when the corridor fell into its familiar hush, someone whispered her name, not the wrong name, the one she'd given the ledger. Yes, but spoken differently, slower, careful, as if the woman knew it wasn't real, but chose to use it anyway. She turned her head toward the sound, 2 cells down. The voice was cracked like boots scraping salt from old planks. "You'll be called soon," the woman said. No edge to it, no warning, just a statement. Soft and steady, like tied against a shore long used to being broken. She didn't answer, didn't move, but the woman kept talking. "They take them before the sun. Before the town wakes." The words floated through the stone like smoke. "They won't chain you, not for that. Just tie your hands with cloth. They say it's gentler." A pause. Then a sound, breath catching at the edge of a laugh. "You'll walk the same hall you came in by, the one with the hook and the beam. Look for it. That's when you'll know." She swallowed. Her throat felt full of salt. The woman's voice softened again, curling around a silence that didn't need filling. "I told them my name once," she said. "Not the one they wrote. It's the one my sister gave me." In the end, it didn't matter, but I still said it. A rustle, straw shifting. They give you bread, water. Sometimes a prayer if the priest isn't late. Sometimes just a nod. She listened, still unmoving, still facing the slit in the wall. The sky beyond it was darker tonight. No moon, no stars. They'll ask if you have anything to say. Another pause. Then, "You don't have to." The voice faded then. Not gone, just finished. Like the last note of a lullaby left floating in a child's empty room, she let the silence grow again. Let it return to its full size. Her hands rested on her lap. The fabric of the trial dress still smelled of damp stone and someone else's fear. But the voice stayed with her. That voice, older, dry, not afraid. It had reached through the walls without asking permission and left something behind. Not comfort, not quite just company, in the shape of what came next. They came before dawn. The air still held the breath of night, cool, moving laced with dust from the old stone corridor. No torch this time, as the dull glint of a lantern carried low, barely casting enough light to find the keyhole. The door opened without a word. She didn't ask where they were taking her. She already knew. Her hands were not bound. Not at first. One guard held the cloth strip, folded, the ends frayed where they'd been used too many times. The other stood waiting, posture straight, gaze averted. This wasn't a moment they wanted to own. She stepped forward. The dress sagged slightly, still damp from her own body, from the night air. Her hair hung loose now, the salt crust long since softened into strands that clung to her neck. She didn't try to fix it. They led her down the long corridor. Not the warm one, the other. The first, the cold one, where every footstep echoed longer than it should. And where the iron doors held their breath at the end, there was a room. Not large, not grand, just a chair, a table, a candle stub burned low in the corner, and a man she didn't recognize. He wore the robes of a clerk, though they were clean and unwrinkled, fresh as if this hour mattered to him in a way it hadn't for anyone else. His pen was poised, parchment already unrolled. She stood. The guards did not speak. He looked at her once, then glanced down. He read a sentence aloud, not with drama, not with weight. Now just the rhythm of habit, the name she'd given, the crimes she hadn't denied, and the decision they had already made. Execution to be carried out before the hour of 6. He waited for a response. She gave none. He did not seem surprised. Instead, he dipped the pen, scratched his seal into the corner of the page, and turned the paper for the guard to witness. The sound of the wax seal pressing into parchment echoed, louder than the reading itself. That was the final hearing, not in the courtroom, not with a jury, just here in a quiet room with smoke curling from the stub of a dying candle. She turned to leave, and that was when she heard them, the chains. Not for her, but somewhere else in the corridor, dragging slow. The sound of someone being moved before her, woman's cough? The clink of metal brushing stone? Someone whispered a prayer. It ended halfway through. She stepped into the hall. The cloth was tied now, not tight, just firm, wrists bound in silence. The guard said nothing. There was no procession, no waiting crowd, just the sound of chains ahead, and her own steps behind and the breath between them, soft and cold and final. She hadn't noticed it before. It was behind the pallet, just beneath the lowest stone, hidden in a place that could only be found by someone waiting to die. The morning, they left her alone briefly after the hearing. While the guards were changed, she moved the straw aside, slowly, quietly, as if the stones themselves might protest. There, where the wall met the floor. She saw it, a carving no larger than her palm, faint, crooked, done in haste. The words weren't perfect, few letters missing, some reversed, but the meaning held. She had a name, and the sea knew it. She stared at it, her breath caught, not from surprise, but from recognition. It had been scratched with something sharp, not a nail, not a knife, bone maybe. The edge of a rib, a tooth, something pulled from what had once lived. The curve of each letter was shallow, but it had taken time. A woman had knelt here, had stayed here, had made her mark with the last sharp thing she had, and even after the sentence, even after the rope, she'd refused to leave unnamed. She ran her fingers across it. The grooves were dry, dust caught in them, soft as ash. She whispered the words to herself. Once, she had a name, and the sea knew it. Then again, slower, as if saying it kept the woman alive, as if it kept herself alive. She didn't know who had carved it. Could have been weeks, go months, years. But that didn't matter, because the sea remembered, and now she would. Too, she looked down at her fingers, cracked, calloused. She searched the cell, found a sliver of bone in the straw, thin, sharp, stained brown with time. She turned to the wall. Next to the words in the narrow space between two stones, she began to carve. Not a name, not hers, just a line, a shape, the curve of a wave, a mast. Leaning in and beneath it, a single letter. L. She pressed harder. The bone slipped in her grip. She didn't stop. Outside, the guards returned. They called once. She didn't answer, but she stood, left the bone behind. Let the mark. It's dry in silence. And as she walked from the cell one last time, she didn't look back. She didn't need to, because the wall would remember. And maybe, someday, the sea would come for it. She rose before they did. Before the key scraped the lock, before the footsteps echoed, before the cloth was tied again, she sat on the edge of the pallet. Legs tucked close, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for something gentler than a sentence. The cell was gray with early light. It's just enough to see the outline of her shape on the wall. Just enough to see her breath when she exhaled into the cold. They were supposed to come. They always did. The hearing was done. The name was written. The paper signed. The rope chosen. But this morning, no one came. Not yet. The corridor was silent. Not even the sound of the broom girl. Not even the familiar groan of the hall door. It's rusted at the hinges. Just stillness. Unbroken. Full. She stared at the crack in the wall. It's the one she'd carved beside the words. The wave she'd drawn had dried now, the lines faint and pale. Ow. It was still there. The mark had held. The stone hadn't swallowed it, and in that silence, time moved strangely. Minutes stretched. Breaths deepened. She counted them without knowing she had. 20-4. 25. 26. Each one slower than the last. The last woman she'd seen taken had gone before sunup. She remembered the way the hall had darkened behind her. How the guards walked softer than usual. How the bell never rang afterward. But now, the bell didn't ring because nothing was happening at all. The guard, who usually passed, didn't. The footsteps never came. And she sat there, not relieved. Not confused. It's just suspended, like a rope hanging with no body at the end of it. Like a ship anchored just offshore. It's waiting for the wind. She stood once, paced the small cell twice the edge of the pallet to the wall, and back. The dress rustled. As she moved, her bare feet touched the worn path others had made, the same arc, again and again. Smoothed by knees and salt and breath, she paused by the door, placed her hand against the iron. It was warm slightly, as if someone had leaned against it from the other side and stepped away only moments before. She didn't knock, didn't call, because the silence was different, not absence, but choice. As if the world beyond the door had made its decision, and for the first time, she wasn't part of it. Not yet. Not anymore. The hours passed. Maybe they didn't. She sat again and waited. And the rope in. Her mind uncoiled, slack, quiet, untied. He didn't say a word when he came, no command. No chain, no cloth for her wrists, just the soft rattle of keys as he unlocked the door, letting it creak open a few slow inches before stepping back. He didn't meet her eyes. He didn't have to. She was already standing, not out of obedience, not out of fear, just readiness. The air in the corridor smelled different, not cleaner, not warmer, just changed. As if something had been moved in. The night, and no one wanted to speak of it. He held a parcel, small, wrapped in ools. Canned. She blinked at it, unsure whether it was meant for her. The guard cleared his throat. A soft sound, embarrassed. He held it out, still not looking at her. She reached for it slowly. The weight surprised her. Not heavy, but familiar. Her hands knew that shape. It's the balance. He stepped back once it left his fingers, as if he hadn't given her anything at all. Then he walked away. Just like that. No explanation. No word. The door remained open. She stood for a long time before unwrapping it. Inside a coat, her coat, the one taken from her after capture, the one she thought lost or sold or burned, still salt-stained at the cuffs, still torn just above the hem where it had snagged on a hook her second to last night at sea, and inside one pocket, Something hard. She reached in, pulled out a small, worn object. A compass, not a fine one. The kind given to young boys who dream of water. Not CARTOGRA, PHERS. It no longer pointed north, but it spun gently. As if remembering, she closed her hand around it. The oilskin fell to the floor, the door still open. She looked out into the corridor, empty, no boots. No guards, just dust, and silence. And a warmth in the air that didn't belong to stone. She shrugged on the coat. It still fit, and for the first time in weeks, the smell of the sea returned to her skin. Not imagined, not remembered. Real. There was. No sound of footsteps behind her, no one to follow. Only the hall, head dim, long, slightly bent to the left, where the broom girl had once swept. Where the ash had been gathered, she stepped forward, not quickly. Not slow, just forward. With the compass in her hand and the coat against her spine. And the knowledge that someone, one man in silence, had left her something more than a name. A piece of what she'd been, or what she still was. Even now, the sound came just as she reached the stair. Faint, hollow, far off through stone and sky. A ship's bell. One ring. Then a pause. Then two. The old rhythm, not of warning, but of marking time. Watches changing. Crews stirring. A signal for those who still lived by tides. She stopped. One hand rested lightly against the wall. Fingers brushing stone worn smooth by other palms. Other bodies passed through in chains or silence. The coat shifted around her, still damp it. The cuffs. Heavy with salt and memory, the bell rang again. 3 rings now. Her chest ached in a place she hadn't felt in years. A spot behind the ribs where laughter used to live. There had been a time when she had followed the bells like a child follows the moon, certain. Obedient, pulled by their call toward the wheel, toward rope, toward salt and light and movement. She remembered lying beneath the forecastle, arms crossed under her head, counting those very bells in the dark, waiting for her turn to take the night watch. And now, here with a coat returned and the door left open. The sound had found her again, not in a dream, not in memory, but real. A sound that shouldn't have reached this far inland, yet here it was, drifting. Through stone curling through corridors, slipping beneath doors meant to hold silence. She walked again, down the stair. The lantern still hung at the bend, unlit now, its glass smudged by breath and dust. Her shadow moved with her, long and loose. At the bottom, a door stood open to the courtyard, a square of dawn-colored light, clouds above, heavy and pale, and beyond them, seagulls, not many, just 1 or 2, wheeling far off, riding currents. She couldn't feel from here. The bell rang once more, for she stepped outside, the ground beneath. Her boots was wet, moss between the stones, smoke curling from chimneys beyond the walls, but no guards, no chains, no rope, no one knoll, hands on her shoulders, only the wind, soft, almost shy, bringing with it the scent of tar and rope and the unmistakable breath of open water. She followed it, not running, not questioning, just walking, like a woman hearing her name in the distance, and the bell rang. Again, 5, close now, not imagined. Waiting as she moved past the outer gates, slow, steady, unseen, the wind shifted behind her, brushing through. Her coat-like fingers through uncombed hair, the morning light had thickened now, pale yellow cutting through cloud and chimney soot, too soft, too warm, too present to ignore. She didn't look back, not at the walls, not at the door, not at the corridor that had swallowed voices for years. Her feet found the old path, the one worn by wheels and rain, where weeds curled up between broken stones and birds picked crumbs from yesterday's carts. The bell no longer rang, but she still heard it, not in the air now, but in her breath. A rhythm, a heartbeat that belonged to water. She passed no one, just laundry lines hung with damp linens, windows half-shuttered. A cat asleep on a stoop, and further on, carved into a low wall near the edge of the harbor, she saw them. The marks. Not letters, not names, just cuts, scratches, symbols no one taught. She stopped beside them, traced one with her thumb. There were dozens. No pattern. Some old, some fresh, a line of circles, a jagged star, a bird, a single wave, a language only women like her knew, not sailors, and not soldiers, the forgotten ones, the ones who had stood behind bars and before crowds and beneath ropes, and under names that never truly belonged to them. She crouched, pressed her hand to the stone, not out of sorrow, but recognition. The women who'd passed this way hadn't vanished. They'd left pieces of themselves, marks that didn't need to be read to be felt, not for memory, for proof. That they had once walked, once waited, once fought. That they had once breathed sea, air before the ledgers wrote them out. She rose. The wind lifted a strand of hair from her face, and in that moment, she no longer felt heavy, not the coat, not the breath, not even the silence. Because the silence here was different. It wasn't the stone silence of cells. It was sea silence, wide, restless, alive. She turned toward the docks, and the water waited. The docks stretched before her, slick with last. Night's rain, its boards swollen in silver, the nails rusted into the wood like they'd grown there naturally. Ropes coiled at the mooring posts, still wet, still fragrant with brine. Gulls cried high above, circling not for her. But she heard them just the same. She stepped onto the wood without hesitation. The sound beneath her boots was soft no clatter, no echo, just the dull rhythm of weight and memory. The sea was calm today, not still, just waiting. A single ship sat at the far end, small, quiet. Nothing grand, no flags raised, no crew calling orders. It rocked gently with the tide. The gangplank lowered. A bucket hung from a hook on the railing, slowly turning in the breeze. There were no guards, no voices shouting her name, no hands reaching for her shoulder. She moved down the dock one step at a time, each breath slower than the last. There were other ships farther out, bigger, loud. But this one had no name carved on the hull, just a dark stripe of old paint, and a patch of sailcloth flapping low like a tired winged at the end of the dock. She stopped, closed her eyes, listened, not for danger, but for something older. Older than rope, older than trial, older than the iron. Key that had closed behind her 100 nights before. The sea, breathing, the tide. Whispering salt in the air, not sharp now but soft. The way it had been the first time she'd kissed the side of a hull and promised herself she'd never go back to land. She opened her eyes, stepped onto the gangplank. It creaked. Once, then steadied. She didn't ask who the boat belonged to. Didn't. Look for a face in the shadow of the sail. If someone had waited for her, they didn't speak. If no one had, the silence still welcomed her. She sat near the bow, hands resting on the rail. Let the coat fall open at the chest. Let the breeze find her again. And there, between the sky and the water, she breathed a name, not aloud. Not the one they gave her, not the ones they read, but hers. The one only the sea had known. It tasted of salt. It vanished in the wind, and she let it go. The ship shifted. Not far, just enough. The tide had turned, and no one called her back. The boat drifted gently now, not far from shore, but far enough that the stone buildings no longer loomed. Far enough that the courtroom bell couldn't reach her. Far enough that the names they'd read, the charges they'd carved, and the ink that dried before sunrise no longer mattered. The water whispered along the hull, not like speech, but like breath, like a sigh after too many years held between. Clenched teeth, she sat near the stern, knees pulled in, one hand resting against the rail. The other held the edge of the sail. It hadn't been raised yet, but she could feel it waiting. Folded, like a sleeping bird. Old canvas. Stained with years, the stitching frayed at the corners, pulled loose where a mast hook had once ripped through during a storm she no longer remembered. The scent of it brought tears to her throat, not sadness, not relief, just recognition. She stood slowly, fingers tracing the edge of the fabric, and when she pulled gently, reverently, the sail lifted, first in silence, then in sound. A long, slow exhale as the cloth rose and filled. Gotcha wind with the kind of patience only the sea understands. That was the sound. That soft surrender. Not the flap of battle, or the crack of speed, but the rustle of something ancient being returned to its rightful shape. The sound a sail makes when it forgives you. It didn't judge how long it taken. Didn't ask what she'd done. Didn't care about courtrooms or cells or all the names she hadn't answered to. It simply opened and moved. The boat shifted. Slow at first, then steady. Forward she gripped the tiller with both hands, palms raw against the wood. It responded the way it always had, not quickly. Not perfectly, but willingly. Like an old friend who remembered the shape of your silence, she looked back only once. The land was already smaller. The prison invisible now. Just a cluster of roofs and windows and stones that had no voice left in them. Ahead. Flags, no company, no map. Only wind, only tide, only the horizon. Breathing, she leaned forward, let the coat catch air. And in that single moment, with sail full, shore fading, and no name but the one the sea had kept, she felt what she hadn't. Since the day she was taken, free, not loud, not wild, just free, and behind her, the sail whispered, soft as sleep, soft as salt, soft as a woman once forgotten. Sailing back into the world that had never stopped waiting, it carried her now, not fast, not far, just steadily, the way a story moves when it no longer needs to prove itself. The sail fluttered, then filled. The ropes creaked faintly against the mast. The boat leaned with a kind of slow grace, as if it too were exhaling after a long silence. Water slipped along the hull in ribbons, brushing like silk against old wood. And beneath it all, the tide moved. Old. Patient. It didn't rush her, didn't push or pull. It simply remembered. This tide. The one beneath her now was the same. Tide that had once lapped against the barnacled sides of the ship she'd first boarded as a girl. The same tide that had taken her inland in chains. The same that had watched her wait. It knew it had carried the weight of things unspoken names, unwritten, women unnamed, and now it carried her back, not to where she'd been, but to what she'd been, a woman beneath the wind, a body balanced by breath. She lay back on the deck now, eyes to the sky. The sail above her swayed gently, its belly full, its voice low. Her hands were stained again, not with ink or earth or rope burn this time, but with salt water, the kind that dries clear, leaves behind only proof. The sky shifted as the boat drifted east. No sun yet, only light soft. Layered light that touched her face without waking her fully. She let her eyes close, let her legs stretch, let her body become part of the boat. The tide spoke in small ways, in lapping, in sway, in silence that wasn't empty. But listening, she wondered, not with fear, just curiosity, where it would take her. A cove, an island, a wrecked port no longer on maps. It didn't matter, because the tide didn't forget. Not the sound of her, breath in sleep, not the way her coat curled at the corners, not the name. She never gave. The sea knew, and the tide carried it. Not loudly, not proudly, just, surely, like it always had. And in that quiet drift, as the wind guided her slowly forward, she rested at last. Not because she was safe, but because she was known. The boat drifted in as morning leaned into day, slow and gentle, the way fog rolls off the surface of water and disappears into nothing. The tide had brought her farther than she'd expected, farther maybe than she deserved, but there it was, ashore, not wide, not marked. Just a curve in the land where trees bent toward the sea and the sand darkened with the tide's reach. Driftwood lay scattered like bones. Grass moved in slow gusts. No port, no harbor, just earth and quiet and a place that hadn't asked for. Her butt didn't push her away either. She stood at the bow, watching it grow closer. No anchor, no fanfare, just water shallowing. Her hands rested on the rail. The coat hung loose on her shoulders now, heavy with sea spray. She'd stopped thinking in hours. She measured time by the way the light moved over her arms, by the color of sky reflected in the water. The boat creaked. Once, leaning slightly, its hull brushing the sandy bottom. That was the end of the ride. It didn't feel like arrival, just pause. She stepped down into the surf. The cold climbed her legs instantly, wrapping around her calves and ankles, pulling her into itself one last time. The dress, still the trial dress, soaked and torn, floated out around her knees like some forgotten flag. She didn't flinch, didn't hurry. Each step into the shallows felt like memory coming loose, not broken, not lost, just softened. The shore gave beneath her feet. Sand, not stone. Earth that moved with her, not against her. When she reached the line where land met sea, she stopped, listened, behind her. The boat rocked gently in place, still waiting, as if unsure whether to go or stay. The sail hung like an exhale, spent, quiet, content. She turned once, looked at it, nodded, a thank you, then kept walking. The shore said nothing, didn't ask where she, Dee, come from, didn't ask who she was. It only was trees rustled softly. Ahead, the wind smelled not just of salt now, but of pine, of soil. She crossed the beach slowly, left no deep footprints. She would not be followed. She would not be remembered here, and that was enough to be allowed to arrive. Without having to explain the storm that brought her, she didn't walk far, just to the tree line, and where the sand gave way to roots and bramble, and the wind shifted no longer coming from the tide, but from something older. Earth. Leaf. The breath of things that didn't float. She turned back once. The beach stretched behind her, its pale and open. The boat still rocked gently in the shallows, half-turned by the current, the sail now folded in. On itself like a sleeping hand. And there, in the wet sand, her footprints clear. Sharp each step, pressed deep where her heel had broken the crust. The arches soft, the toes splayed from the pull of water. They moved in a line from sea to shore, curved just slightly where she'd paused near the edge. She waited, stared, expecting. Almost for them to wash away, for the tide to rise again, reach up and take them back. But it didn't. The waves stopped just short. They whispered. But they didn't claim her. Steps not this time. There was something sacred in that refusal, as if the sea was giving her. This not a farewell, not a promise, just a record of her having passed, of her having lived, of her having left. She walked back toward them slowly, bare feet brushing against her own trail. She stood in one of the prints, heel fitted perfectly, the edge already drying at the sides. No one would know whose feet had made them, no. One would trace them, but they were hers, and they remained. She looked once more to the boat. It hadn't drifted. It waited, and she knew. Now, it might always wait, or it might not. Maybe someone else would find it, or maybe the tide would lift it again and carry it back to the world she came from. Either way, it had done its work, and so had she. She stepped out of the footprint, left, the rest untouched, and walked into the trees. The sea didn't follow. It didn't have to. It had. It's already remembered everything. The forest took her in like breath. Not hurried, not curious, just accepting. The way quiet things are when they've seen too much to ask questions. Branches arched overhead, their leaves catching the wind in soft rustles, like cloth being folded by gentle hands. The path, if it could be called, that wound through moss. And root and stone, dappled in light the color of old gold. She walked without purpose, letting her feet choose direction. Her body lightened by something she hadn't recognized until now. She was no longer being watched. Not by guards, not by courts, not by the eyes of a crew waiting for orders, and the absence of it felt strange, like silence after years of noise. She moved slowly, trailing her fingers along the bark of a tree. It was smooth in places, chipped in others. A scar ran up its side, narrow and dark, like an old wound that no longer hurt. Pressed her palm flat against it and leaned in, listening. Not for answers. Just to feel the steadiness of something that had stayed standing. And then she said it low, almost voiceless. A name not for anyone else. Not the ones from the ledger, or the court, or the cell. Not the name that had floated through trial rooms like fog. The real one. The first one. The name whispered to her by a woman long gone, whose hands had smelled of flour and salt hood. Once tied a ribbon in her hair and told her the world would not be fair, but she could still choose where she placed her feet. She said that name, now, gave it to the trees, to the leaves, to the hush, and no one answered. But nothing rejected it. It stayed in the air. A moment then fell into the roots. She sat beneath the tree then, folding her legs, the coat wrapped around her shoulders. The forest moved quietly around her. A breeze carried the scent of rain, though none had fallen. Somewhere nearby a bird sang a single note, then stopped. The kind of stillness found only where names are returned, not taken, not renamed, just returned. She closed her eyes, let her head rest against the trunk, and knew without fear, without needing to look that no one would call for. Not today, not here. The world could keep its records, the sea could keep its salt, but this moment belonged to her and to the name she'd kept safe, deep beneath skin and silence. Until now, she slept beneath the tree, though she didn't mean to, not deeply. Not the sleep of exhaustion. Just a soft surrender, the kind that comes after a long silence has finally exhaled. Her head tilted to one side, her coat curled under her cheek like a pillow remembered from another life. The forest cradled her breath without judgment, and when she awoke, the wind had changed, not sharp, not new, just quieter. It rustled through the branches above her, slow and careful, like it had taken its time coming to find her. It moved through her hair, lifted the edge of her coat, kissed the back of her hand with fingers cooler than memory. But it didn't pull, it didn't push, it didn't ask her to rise. It just was. The kind of wind that doesn't come with questions, that doesn't ask what she's done, where she's run, what verdict was written on paper, left in some drawer in some courthouse long, swallowed by moss and time. She opened her eyes slowly. The canopy above her had shifted. Gold light filtered through, soft as candle glow behind linen curtains. Dust drifted through it like ash in a quiet room. A single leaf turned slowly in place, held mid-air by a thread of wind too thin to be seen. She sat up, her bones protesting, but gently. The ache was not from punishment now, it was from living. She looked around. The forest hadn't changed. It still watched, still listened, but it felt familiar now, like she'd been here before, even if she hadn't. She reached for her compass, still tucked in her coat pocket, still spinning slowly. She didn't need it, not really. But it comforted her the way some sailors carried bits of rope just to feel the weight of old knots in their hands. She stood brushing moss from the back of her legs and looked toward where the light touched the ground. There was no path, just a direction. She followed it, and the wind followed her, not guiding, not questioning. Just beside her, like an old friend with no interest in stories, only presence. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every step forward was enough. Every breath. In this silence, this stillness, this life that asked nothing of her but to keep walking, it was hers now, not borrowed. Not owed hers. And the wind, carrying no verdict, no name, no memory of trial or tide, kept her company. The forest thinned without warning. The trees no longer pressed in close, no longer watched with such still eyes. The light grew stronger, warmer now, a honeyed softness that clung to the shoulders, that wrapped around the ankles like a child's hands, asking nothing but for her to stay a little longer. She stopped near a patch of moss so thick it looked like woven green wool, bent slowly, and removed her boots. The leather peeled away, stiff from salt and silence. Her heels were red, one toe still bruised from the long days in the cell. She didn't wince. She only pressed her feet into the moss, letting it rise up between her toes. The boots she left beneath. The boots she left beneath a low branch. Not hidden, just done with. They'd carried her through enough. She walked forward now, barefoot, each step quieter than the last. Each touch of skin to earth an echo of something older, not the woman she'd had to become. Not the accused, not the captain, but the girl. The girl who once ran barefoot across muddy roads, who'd leaped into tide pools, who'd laughed with a mouth full of sun. She hadn't thought of that girl in years, but she walked like her now, arms loose, hair falling into her eyes, shoulders no longer braced against expectation. The ground here smelled of a river. Somewhere nearby, water trickled through roots, murmuring secrets only the rocks could hold. A branch snapped under her step, soft and dry. A bird startled into flight. She didn't stop. It didn't feel like hiding anymore or fleeing. It felt like returning not to a place, but to something inside. She passed a small clearing where a ring of mushrooms grew in the shape of a question. Mark, she smiled, not with her mouth, just her breath, just her bones. The way a body smiles when it remembers safety. In the still air, her bare feet made no sound, but they left faint impressions in the loam. A print here, a press of heel there, nothing that would last. And yet enough for now. She stepped over a root, and into another patch of moss, deeper this time. It cradled her feet, rising gently around her skin like water. She closed her eyes for a moment, felt it. The earth holding her without chains, without judgment, without a name, just holding. And in that softness, she remembered something. A song, low and half forgotten, swung to her long ago. She didn't sing it aloud. She simply walked in rhythm with it, and the girl inside her barefoot, salt-stung brave, walked with her. The sun was dipping again, not low yet, just beginning. Its long descent, stretching light sideways through the trees, casting shadows long enough to step into. The hush of the forest shifted too. Daybirds quieted. Leaves rustled slower. Everything around her began to breathe in, hold. She had walked for hours, though she hadn't felt time pass. Her feet were dirty now, pressed with twigs and smudges of moss. The air tasted dry, golden, near sweet, like smoke after rain, or bread just out of sight. She paused at the edge of a clearing. It was small, opened the kind of space that felt watched, even when it wasn't. The trees circled loosely around it, as if they knew not to come too close, and in the middle of the clearing, she saw it in her mind, not real, not now, but she saw it just the same. The rope tied low, not swinging. Thick, unfrayed, the kind they used. She stared at the air above it, where the gallows would have been, where the sun would catch the grain of the wood, where breath would stop and sound would vanish. The image came uninvited, but not unwelcome. She'd carried it for weeks, in court, in cell, on ship. Beneath her skin, she walked to the center of the clearing. There was no rope, no post, no platform, only earth, only light. But she stood where it would have been. She tilted her head back, let her eyes close. Imagined the rope at her throat. Imagined the way they would have looked at her, the clerk, the girl with the broom, the magistrate who wouldn't say her name. She imagined the hush just before the drop. Imagined the last. Breath, the weight, the sway, and then nothing. She didn't cry. She'd thought she would. She had imagined tears, a sting of regret, the ache of something unfinished. But standing there, arms loose, face lifted to the sun, she felt none of it. Not sadness, not relief, just peace. Because she had passed that place, not above it, not around it, through it, and lived. Not loudly, but completely. The wind stirred the hem of her coat. Birds sang, high in the canopy, slow and clear. She opened her eyes, took a breath, then stepped forward, out of the center of the clearing, not running. Not rushing, just walking like a woman who knew what the rope it meant and what it no longer did. The road curved gently through the hills, the wheels of the carriage creaking beneath her like tired joints in cold air. It wasn't the kind of carriage used for prisoners. No iron cage, no wooden slats. Just a plain cart with a canvas cover and an old bench that groaned with every turn. She had not planned to be here. But the man who found her near the edge of the clearing hadn't asked questions, only offered space in the back, a blanket folded once, and a nod toward the east. His eyes had been soft, not with kindness, but with understanding. He had driven in silence, and she had ridden in silence. Now the trees had thinned, fields rolled. Wide on either side, sheep dotted the hills like pale stones, unmoving, half asleep in the golden hush of late afternoon. The window was small, framed in wood with a pane so old it wavered at the edges. She leaned forward now, breath close to. The glass had fogged, a soft cloud, a mark the first she'd made in hours. She drew nothing in it, just watched it spread, watched it vanish. Watched it come again, proof she was still here, still breathing. She'd almost forgotten what that looked like. The blanket on her lap was rough-woven, smelled faintly of dust and horses. She clutched it loosely, the way one holds something they could give back at any moment. The coat was still around her shoulders, heavy with salt and time. But now it held warmth too, not just memory. Outside the window, a tree passed, bent low, then another, a crooked fence. Leaning away from the road, a farmhouse in the distance, its roof sagging like tired shoulders. The man driving hadn't spoken since. Midday, she didn't ask where they were going. It didn't matter, only that they were. That the wheels turned, that the sun moved, and that she could breathe. Here, without chains, without ink-stained hands, without the soft snap of a courtroom seal closing behind her. Her breath fogged the window. Again, she leaned closer, watched the mist bloom against the glass, then fade, over and over, like waves, like tide, like the sea, pressed, thin against the edge of memory, always returning, always leaving. She sat back, closed her eyes, and let the road carry her wherever it would. She dreamed of it again that night. Not the sea, not the trees, the scaffold, bare, high, quiet, no crowd, no shouting. Just the sound of wood underfoot, hollow and waiting. She felt the rope, imagined or not, heavy behind her neck. She saw the platform beneath her toes, rough sawn, dusted in morning dew. The sun was never out in this dream, only gray light. Fog thick enough to hold breath. She walked forward, not resisting, not running, as though her feet knew. It's the way without asking her. And then something changed. A sound, small, out of place, not. Boots, not bells, footsteps, soft, bare, coming from below, behind, beside, and then a voice, a child's, perhaps, or something older, made small by kindness. It said only one word. Wait. She stopped. On the step, the noose above her, the edge of the sky behind. The wood beneath her feet softened, the air shifted. She turned slowly and saw nothing. The mist, just the shape of a door where there hadn't been one before. Open, not wide. It's just enough. Enough to choose. Enough to step through. She didn't run in the dream. She only walked, and the scaffold stayed behind, waiting, forgotten, empty. She woke before dawn, eyes open in the half-dark, the carriage still gently rocking beneath her. The man was still driving, his shoulders a faint silhouette beyond the canvas flap, but her breath felt different. Now deeper, lighter, like the rope had never touched her, like the dream had been not a warning, but a release. She blinked once. The stars outside were beginning, too pale, and the road beneath her moved forward, not toward judgment, But away from it, dawn came without noise. The sky turned from slate to pearl, slow as breath rising in a sleeping chest. No fanfare, no fire. Just the quiet shifting of light across the world, like a cloth being lifted from a forgotten table. She felt it first on her hands. The warmth, gentle, tentative, as if the sun was asking permission to touch her again. The carriage had stopped. The driver, the man who never asked, sat by a low fire near a crumbling stone wall, his hat in his lap, eyes closed, not asleep, just listening. She stepped down from the cart, boots in hand, though she didn't wear them. The grass was soft here, wet with dew, tender underfoot, like moss remembered from the forest days before, and in the air faint. Behind the hills she smelled it. Salt. She turned, and there it was, far off, past the high grass and the curve of the earth. Just where the land fell gently into blue, the sea distant, still silver. In the morning light, waiting not, crashing, not calling, just there, as if it had never stopped, as if it had known she'd come. She stood in the field for a long time, not moving, not blinking, just letting her body remember the way the tide smells. Before storm, the way sails sound when they fill, the ache in the arms. After hauling rope for hours, the song sung low under breath when no one is listening. All of it, returned not loud, not rushed, just as it had always been. The sea hadn't come to find her. It had simply remained, like a promise, like a name whispered too softly to fade. She walked toward it, slow and steady, each step an echo, each breath a tide. And somewhere in the wind she could hear it, not a bell, not a voice, but the faint creak of ood, the stretch of canvas, a sail unfurling, not from a ship she knew, not from the past, but from something still waiting for her, a vessel not for escape, but return to herself, to salt, to silence, to freedom, born not of fire or fury, but of choosing. And the sea, still waiting, offered her that choice. Now quietly, completely, she stepped closer and did not stop at the water's edge. Everything slowed. The tide lapped at the shore in soft, broken pulses, each wave folding over the next like a whispered sentence that never quite finished. Foam clung to the stones. The sea moved not with urgency, but with memory, the kind that didn't need to speak to be heard. She stood ankle-deep in it, chill sinking into her bones and settling there like truth. Her feet no longer hesitated, the hem of her dress still. That old trial cloth floated out around her calves, lighter now. The weight of the cell, the rope, the names, all washed clean in the brine. She looked out toward the horizon, not for ships, not for rescue, just for stillness, just for the place where water and sky touched, where the line blurred and the world no longer demanded answers. The wind moved through her hair, lifted the edges of her coat, carried salt on its breath, and she breathed it in. The salt tasted like the truth of her, not the truth they tried to write in courtrooms, not the one carved in ink by clerks who never looked her in the eye. This was deeper, older, truth born in tide pools and massed shadows, in songs hummed over splinters and storms. She took one step deeper, then another, not to vanish, not to be erased, but to be held by the sea, by the silence, by the knowing. The silence here was different, not the silence of a locked cell, not the silence of fear, but the kind that lives at the bottom of the sea, heavy, warm, infinite. It wrapped around her like a second skin, not suffocating, cradling. She knelt in the shallows. Water to her waist now, let her hands float. Her eyes closed, her breath stilled, and for the first time since the first chain touched her wrist, she felt no weight at all. Not from names, not from rope, not from memory, only water, only wind, only salt and silence. The kind that needs no voice to be heard, the kind that waits for no one, the kind that welcomes you home. She smiled, not with her mouth, but with her soul and the sea, remembering everything she had ever been, answered with nothing but itself, and that was enough. The story ended not in punishment, not in escape, but in stillness. Saltwater silence, where she was never forgotten, where she was never named, only known.